lawmakers. The House passes Governor Perdue's $100 million Land Conservation Act. Supporters rally in favor of legislation that would require seatbelt use in pickup trucks. And legislators invite the public to see the Georgia General Assembly in action on a rare Saturday session. Those stories and more are next.
Live from Atlanta, this is Lawmakers for Monday, January 31st. Here are your anchors in Wendy Lawson and Gerald Bryan.
Good evening, everyone. Also on tonight's program, we'll talk with the House Speaker Pro Tem Mark Burkhalter and Senate Minority Caucus Vice Chair Valencia C.
Plus controversy over Senate Bill 5 and the power of eminent domain. But our top story tonight, House passage of Governor Perdue's Land Conservation Act. Governor Perdue calls this initiative more far-reaching than any previous conservation efforts in the state, and today the Land Conservation Act is one step closer to being signed into law. Lawmakers Chriss Knight joins us live from the Capitol with more. Chris.
In Wendy, House Bill 98 passed in the House by a vote of 174 to 0. The legislation aims to preserve Georgia's green space for the future.
We're tickled to death.
Neil Hearing from the Sierra Club expresses his excitement after the House unanimously passed House Bill 98, the Governor's Land Conservation Act.
So we've got a bill that protects natural resources from this new legislature.
The Governor's floor leader, Representative Rich Golick, explains the intent of the bill.
That promotes partnerships between local governments, the Department of Natural Resources, other state and federal agencies, and the private sector for the conservation of the state's valuable natural resources while keeping land in private ownership wherever possible.
House Bill 98 would replace the current Green Space program enacted in 1996.
A big difference between the Green Space program and this particular program has to do with the fact that the Green Space program was limited to communities of at least 60,000 people. The Georgia Land Conservation Act does not have that limitation.
Which means the smaller counties across the state would be able to participate in the program.
It's not just for the largest areas, it's for the smaller areas too.
While House Bill 98 would strike the current goal of setting aside 20% of existing green space in metropolitan counties, Neil Hearing from the Sierra Club says the $100 million in state, federal, and private funds committed to jumpstart the program makes up for the loss.
But the fact that $100 million is going to reserve green space and protect important natural areas in the state is a good thing for us to get.
And House Bill 98 now heads over to the Senate. Reporting live, I'm Chriss Knight for Lawmakers.
Now, Chris, did that bill pass with any amendments added to it?
Yes, it did, in Wendy. In addition to a few technical amendments, one amendment that passed unanimously would make the rulemaking process for land transactions open to the public.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris.
In other news, expect heavy debate on the floor of the Senate tomorrow. Tort reform will be the issue. There were 3 hearings last week as the Senate Judiciary Committee discussed the bill that would reform the way medical malpractice suits are litigated. Today, the Senate Rules Committee voted unanimously to add tort reform, Senate Bill 3, to tomorrow's calendar. Committee Chairman Don Balfour decided it would be the only bill debated tomorrow because of the lengthy discussion that is expected. We at Lawmakers will, of course, have coverage of that debate tomorrow.
And today, the Senate Rules Committee also voted to give a favorable due pass to a resolution that contains the Governor's Faith and Family Services Initiative. That resolution needs the approval of 2/3 majority of both the House and Senate. 36 senators have signed on to endorse the resolution, including Senator Seth Harp, who's the primary sponsor of that bill.
We had 36 endorsements when we dropped the bill. It's indicative of the fact that this bill was addressed and passed overwhelmingly by the Senate last year, and it will also happen. I think it'll pass very well again this year.
If the resolution passes out of both houses, the people of the state would vote to amend the question. The ballot would read, shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended in a manner consistent with the United States Constitution so as to prevent discrimination in public funding of social services by allowing religious or sectarian institutions to receive public aid directly or indirectly for the provisions of such services? Senator Harp says he expects the Faith and Family Services Amendment could make it to the Senate floor as soon as Thursday.
Meanwhile, the sponsor of Senate Bill 5, which promotes public-private partnerships, says he wishes members of the media would read the bill before trashing it. In an article on today's opinion page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, it's charged that the bill is an attempt to, quote, hijack government power for private gain, unquote, by making it easier for developers to use eminent domain to seize private property. Senator Dan Moody says, read the bill.
Now, I understand that after about 12 pages of legal-sized paper, it's difficult to pay attention sometimes, but on the top of page 13, the power of eminent domain shall not be delegated to any operator under any public-private agreement. Now, again, I just would ask that some people in the media would start reading some of these things that we spend so much money publishing before they start to trash a bill. I'd like to draw your attention to Senate Bill 86. The senator from the 3rd, one of our newcomers, has introduced a really good bill that specifically deals with eminent domain. My bill, Senate Bill 5, does not. Senate Bill 86 does. In his bill, he simply says that eminent domain should not be allowed by anybody for economic development or simply to generate tax revenues. I signed on to that bill, and if you haven't, you should too. Look at the successes. I can't go over them. I'm going to run out of time here real soon. Look at the successes of other projects that have been done in the United States with this type of language. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I also talked with Senate Majority Leader Bill Stevens, who is a co-sponsor of Senate Bill 5. He says the bill will get careful examination in committee.
Well, what I'm saying is most bills, when they get to committee, are not perfected. And this bill will be examined very harshly and examined for those reasons, and it should be. And bills are not perfect when they're introduced, but the committee process is where that's worked out and amendments are offered. I wouldn't be surprised to see substantial changes in SB 5.
Okay. Senator Moody said there would be committee hearings on SB 5 beginning tomorrow.
Well, the Department of Corrections Commissioner James Donald has laid out his legislative agenda, which includes a work program for inmates and in-house transition centers. One major priority, to reduce recidivism. David Zelski spent the day with the commissioner and joins us live with more. David.
Well, thanks, Nwandi. I spent the day at Phillips State Prison in Beaufort, Georgia, where inmates volunteer to work at a print shop. In turn, they learn work skills for when they are released.
Good afternoon, man.
Department of Corrections Commissioner James Donald wants to put his inmates to work, but with pay.
They don't get paid anything until we take out for restitution. You know, our governor is really big on restitution. Pay back the victims for the crimes they committed. We'll pay back me for housing them, but more importantly, we'll provide money and resources to the families.
This program would also help build a skill set so that there's an option besides crime when the inmate is reintroduced into the community.
Every day I'm contacted by someone who's interested in our project or someone who applauds our project and says very simply, I wished I had it when my husband was in the institution.
Now, this work program would be a partnership with the Department of Labor, so these prison jobs don't interfere with civilian labor. Reporting live, I'm David Zelski for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, David. And we'll have more on this proposed work program and other initiatives that David discussed with Commissioner Donald on our program tomorrow night.
There was a resolution in the state Senate today to honor Linda Meggers, the former director of the Legislative Reapportionment Office. Friday, House Speaker Glenn Richardson said that Republican leadership and Ms. Meggers had come to a mutual agreement to terminate her state contract. Today, Republican Senator Don Balfour said Meggers should not be honored because of how she handled reapportionment when Democrats controlled the legislature.
And the state of Georgia, the federal courts have said absolutely that is wrong. And the citizens of this state looked at it as wrong too. Both Republican and Democrats in this state looked at what was done. All you had to do was look at those maps and you know what was done was wrong. It was adamantly wrong. And we should not be honoring someone who wasted millions of dollars, did something that was obviously unconstitutional for the betterment, not of the state. That had nothing to do with the betterment of the state. And I would hope you would consider, just like those 3 judges did, and not vote for this resolution.
This has turned into a situation where I think it's an overreaction to a personal compliment, which is a privilege resolution. You ought not to have said anything. You ought to have let it go. A privileged resolution is not going to be used in a court case. And you've also embarrassed somebody. I'm sorry that you did that, and I wish you hadn't. I think you ought to adopt it without any more consideration, and I pledge to fight my party if they ever try to use this privilege resolution in a court case just to compliment a fine person.
The resolution honoring Linda Meggers passed eventually 36-14.
Well, today, Representative Tom Bordeaux spoke out against tort reform measures outlined in Senate Bill 3 and against House Bill 197, which would require hospitals to ask unmarried women for the names of their children's fathers.
Under legislation that is now burning its way through this General Assembly, much as I think Sherman probably burned his way through Georgia, a pregnant woman in many instances will effectively not be able to sue her obstetrician when he botches the delivery and negligently causes her baby's death. That will include situations where the obstetrician is careless, where he's incompetent, and yes, even where he's drunk. But it's heartening, I guess, to know that this General Assembly is not bent on denying our constituents of their rights, or there is House Bill 197. That bill provides, in part, that under certain circumstances, a rapist will be permitted to sue her victim's doctor if the raped woman chooses to have an abortion. 75 of you sponsored that legislation. It is indeed a new day in Georgia.
Meanwhile, the House and Senate Majority Leaders want to invite Georgia families to a special Saturday, March 12th session of the Georgia General Assembly.
This is an effort to really include the Georgia people in the legislative process. It's very difficult, as you know, for them to get down here during the week, and we're hoping that they'll take advantage of this. We're going to ask the Secretary of State's office if she would to work with us and have Capitol tours available that day so that families can come down and take tours of the Capitol, and we're going to provide additional staff and interns from our offices if she needs additional personnel to accomplish this.
Now, legislatively, the day would be devoted to repealing antiquated state laws, including some of the remaining statutes that promote racial discrimination. Senator Bill Stevens noted that Representative Tyrone Brooks is among those legislators pointing out the need to repeal those Jim Crow laws.
There are any number of laws like the Jim Crow laws that need to come off Georgia's books. There are also some on there that are kind of antiquated and humorous, and we're going to be addressing those too. It'll be a limited agenda because we can't spend a lot of time that morning and then still get to doing some things with families, but we're going to try to not have anything except bipartisan agreement on which laws that we're going to be removing, and that way we don't get into partisan bickering over somebody trying to take political advantage. It'll be a day that'll be informal and focused on Georgia families.
Now, among the odd laws that could bite the dust, one that bans donkeys from being kept in bathtubs and one that bans you from carrying an ice cream cone in your back pocket, but only on Sundays. One final item from that GOP news conference, House Majority Leader Keene says House hawks have been used for the first time. Those are ex officio committee members who can vote in various committees.
That we had to use the hawks in the House was at a meeting of children and youth. And we had to do it so we would have a quorum just to have an organizational meeting and adopt the rules. And the reason we had to do that is because there was only one Democrat that showed up. And there was no bills to debate, but the chairman needed a quorum just to adopt the operating rules.
By Georgia law, unlike most motorists, a person in a pickup truck does not have to wear a seatbelt. That would change if some House members have their way. A bipartisan group has signed off on legislation that would take away the exemption from pickup truck drivers. Lawmakers Jesse Freeman has that story. Jesse.
Thanks, Wandy. A group called the Safe America Foundation rallied at the Capitol today to promote safe driving for young and old alike. They say one way roads could be safer is to require all pickup truck drivers to wear seat belts. Representative Calvin Hill sponsors a bill that requires that and was a featured speaker at today's rally. Since the Georgia seatbelt law was passed in 1996, pickup truck drivers have been excluded. Representative Calvin Hill has a bill that may end that exclusion.
People that are driving trucks are on the same highways as people with cars who are driving right along, so we should have parity. If you're required to have a seatbelt on, and for example an excursion, why shouldn't you be required to have one on a Ford F-350, which is basically the same vehicle? And most of the pickup trucks today are actually being driven on the road versus on the farm.
Hill is a board member of the Safe America Foundation, a group that advocates safety laws and administers driver's education classes to young people. Foundation President Lynn Pagano says young people can particularly benefit from the law.
I think people appreciate consistency. They don't want to see exemptions because it looks like favoritism. So for a teenager to realize that, we enforce the law 100% of the time, whether you're driving a pickup or a sedan or an SUV, I think that just gives them the sense of logic that it matters for everybody.
Representative Hill says he does want to continue to exclude farm trucks from seatbelt laws. This bill was pre-filed in December but has not come up for vote in the House. Reporting live, I'm Jesse Freeman for Lawmakers.
Thanks a lot, Jesse.
Senate Democrat leaders agree that education is their major focus this session. Today I talked with Senator Valencia C., the Vice Chair of the Minority Caucus in the Senate.
Well, I personally think that we are not funding education. We are investing in education, as Senate Bill 33 suggested. While I think that's an excellent program when we're dealing with virtual schools, I think having the open debate, particularly so that Democrats could get the point across that we need to make sure that public schools are given priority. It's all designed to increase the educational posture of public schools. Therefore, public school kids should be priority, particularly when there's just a limited amount of space for public school kids.
Now, the change in that bill, the amendment was originally proposed by a Democratic member of the Senate. Do you see that as a Democratic victory in getting acknowledgement that public schools should get first priority?
I see it as a Democratic victory in conjunction with bipartisan support. I think having that open debate is what led us to where we were, and that is to make sure we stay focused on the real issue, and that is making sure that we take care of the public school system.
Now, a third part of the governor's education plan still to come through is the flexibility part. I think as far as Democrats are concerned, there is some controversy there because flexibility has meant that in some cases class sizes aren't as small as it was hoped that they would be. The Lieutenant Governor has a proposal that would mandate class sizes. What would you like to accomplish in the Senate as far as class size is concerned?
Class sizes should be reduced. That's first and foremost. It's a given fact that the lower the class size, the better the children learn. And I think that we had already put into law that we would reduce class size, particularly in kindergarten through third grades. And if we start doing that, even the virtual schools would be more important because we would have educated the kids at an earlier age. So I think we need to fund education as opposed to just investing in all these other things. I think keeping our priorities in order, and priority one should be the lesser grades, the smaller class size, and we can do that by funding it.
Let's move on to the area of health care. There is Medicaid reform, although some would debate whether it's reform or not, that's underway now administratively. Actually, there won't be many things that are done legislatively. Your take on what's being done with Medicaid and if it's the right thing to do, moving to managed care?
Managed care, I think, is something to be desired. It's going to have a lot of work. It could work, but I don't think the current form will work. I think that the party as a whole, meaning the Republican Party, is a party that hurts people. Think of all the people, children included, that will be hurt by all the cuts in some of the things that are going on with that Medicaid process.
Peach Care, which is the plan which currently covers many children in Georgia as far as health insurance is concerned, that would go under the new managed care system. Is there any way for Democrats to keep that from happening?
I don't know that there is, but I do know that we are working hard to try to have a defense, if you will, in that regard.
Okay, let's finish up with the issue of tort reform. We believe that is scheduled to be debated on the floor of the Senate tomorrow. Your party's take on what has been done with tort reform and what you'll be saying tomorrow from the floor of the Senate.
Well, I think that tort reform has so many facets. We'll have to take a look at what is coming from the committee in its current form so that we will know exactly where we're going to stand. We debated this issue 2 years ago. We continue to debate this issue. It's not a new issue, but I think that we really have to get a handle because something currently has to be done. There's no question about it. It's just how we get there so that we won't hurt the masses of the people. And I think caps are something that will be hurtful, and I think that might be the place where we need to have some negotiation and some direct dialogue.
Okay, we are out of time. We thank you very much for your time, Senator Valencia C., who is the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus in the State Senate. Thanks for joining us on Lawmakers.
House Bill 98 earlier became the first piece of legislation passed out of the House. Earlier, I asked House Speaker Pro Tem Mark Burkhalter the significance of passage of the governor's land conservation bill.
First of all, it sends a very clear message that this governor and the Republican legislature that supports him is for protecting green space and the environment. It's an issue oftentimes in the past that Republicans don't get a lot of credit for, but if you go back historically, it is Republicans who began the national park system that we have today back in the days of Teddy Roosevelt. And I think it's a very clear sign that we're going to work with this governor. He has some good ideas that, quite frankly, have been pent up over the last few years, and we're going to try to release them.
Well, certainly this does change the way that the green space has been allocated around the state. And I know that some folks brought up concerns about the fact that we were removing the 20% as an actual amount that had to be set aside. What do you think the impact is going to be statewide of opening it up a little bit more than it has been in the past?
Well, I think the previous Green Space Initiative, which I supported, being from a fast-growing community in the metro Atlanta area, was a good one. But I think this legislation has an opportunity to give other communities outside the metro area a chance to preserve green space and do it at a price before they start developing. I think the mature areas, real estate's obviously expensive, and we need to continue any way we can to set that land aside. But I would contend and submit to you that this legislation gives us a better chance to do that, leveraging public-private partnerships, than the previous initiative did back in the Barnes administration, which was just a straight purchase of land.
Now, turning our attention a little bit to the civil justice issue, I know you've been very instrumental in trying to craft some legislation that would change the way malpractice lawsuits are handled here in Georgia. Where does that stand right now, and where would you like to see it go in this session?
Well, I think the Senate did a great job in expeditiously passing some meaningful measures, which I think can go a long way towards ending what I see as a culture of lawsuits we have in society, which have, quite honestly, kept everyday people and politicians from making good common sense decisions in their lives and their businesses. And we like to think this is not just a tort reform measure, but it's also a measure that is what we call a litigation tax cut to Georgians. If you look at the cost of goods and services, not just in the medical community, but every aspect of your life, and how they go up as relative to the number of lawsuits that get filed, many of which are frivolous, I think you see a real need for some sort of tort reform measures, and we're going to make sure that we act on it quickly in the House and give it fair hearing, but also deliver to Georgians what they want in a timely fashion.
And from what you've seen and heard thus far, you know, we've always had the dispute between the doctors, the lawyers, and the insurance companies. Where is the room for compromise on this issue?
Well, it's to be seen. I think that on one hand, I mean, everything we do down here seems to ultimately get compromised in some form or fashion. But we have to see some tangible results. If we're going to go through the effort of tort reform, we need to make sure the product that we pass results in removing this culture of lawsuits, as I refer to, and also reduces costs, not only in premiums, but cost of services to our citizens in Georgia.
And then finally, we, of course, are seeing the governor's education package making its way over from the Senate over to the House side. As you see it, what are some of the significant changes that could perhaps benefit the education system throughout the state of Georgia?
Well, we're empowering people and empowering local school systems, and you never lose when you do that. Through the budget, we're also funding the fast-growth schools and K through 12, as we should. As you know, they've taken a pretty good hit in the last couple of years because of our revenues being down. And I think most important two things we can do for our local school systems is give them flexibility, which the governor's bills do, to make more of their own decisions, give them the money to better educate our children in the classroom with less strings attached.
All right, Representative Mark Burkhalter, thanks so much for being with us here on Lawmakers.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
Well, an Appropriations Subcommittee on Education today asked whether it would be financially feasible to reduce the pre-K school day.
Actually, we have talked about that, and there is some research about the hours. We've been involved in a 6-state study that's been comparing all those different kind of components. We're waiting for the first, well, actually, we just got the first draft. We don't have the final results of that study, but it compares hours on what children's outcomes are. My understanding is that 6.5 hours to full day, you're able to introduce a child to a lot of instructional opportunities. You're able to do things with a child in the 6.5 hours that for 2 hours it's hard to actually really do. Plus the cost may be some savings, but it's not tremendous because I actually know some that do a 2.5 hour and they pay more than what we pay for the 6.5 hour.
Asked about whether the high school graduation test needs to be modified, State School Superintendent Kathy Cox suggested that student performance will improve when teacher attitudes do.
That's been the prevailing attitude about the high school graduation test. I'm doing my job. I teach the curriculum. I can't help it if they fail my class and they don't do what's required and then they fail that test. It's not my responsibility. You see, that's not the attitude our elementary school teachers have about their students. Those teachers just don't go in there and say, well, I did my job, because to them, their job is, did that child get it? And they have just a completely different attitude. And we have had this nonchalant, hands-off, I'm doing my job, it's not my fault they didn't get it, about our high school students. And it's got to change.
And finally tonight, Senate Majority Leader Bill Stevens said he won't be here on Wednesday because it's a special day for his son Jordan.
And as a proud father, I'm pleased to announce that my 17-year-old son, Jordan, who's been recruited by numerous colleges around the country, will be signing with the United States Naval Academy at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. He is twice as big and twice as smart as his dad. He's 6'4", 281 pounds, and as a senior at the senior defensive lineman at North Hall High School, all-area team selection, 8 tackles a game, 3 interceptions, which is pretty good for a defensive tackle. Excuse me while I do this. I've always I'm his agent as well.
Well, congratulations, Jordan. Coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, it's a busy day under the Gold Dome as both firefighters and the National Federation of Independent Businesses have their days at the Capitol. Plus, the Senate is expected to debate tort reform. We'll have all those stories and the latest from under the Gold Dome. That's tomorrow at 7 p.m. If you missed any part of this broadcast, tune in when Lawmakers is rebroadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. on GPB. And just a reminder for those of you with access to the Internet, you can watch Lawmakers online. Lawmakers is streamed live and archived on our website every night that we're on the air. If you have ever wondered what happens to all those appraised items once Antiques Roadshow leaves your town, well, you'll want to be sure to stay tuned for Antiques Roadshow FYI. That program's coming up next on Georgia Public Broadcasting.
And for people watching the rebroadcast, I won't do it any better that time tonight. That's our program for this, the 9th legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly. Thanks for joining us. I'm Gerald Bryant.
And I'm Wandy Lawson. For everyone here at Lawmakers, have a good night.
Good night.